Hey guys, and welcome back to the Ramble. I am your humble hermit host, Maria Legier, and this is Emotional Labour. So there I stood, outside in the pouring rain, cold winds of late November digging through my clothing and clawing through my skin, all the way to the bone. Breathless, I gazed at the chaos surrounding me, the debris and the detritus and the destruction that followed in the wake of the gargantuan task at hand. Rain soaked through my clothes. I was drenched to the bone. It was getting very cold, and I was getting rather tired. I had been engaged in the same task for about a week at that point. Rough, tough and heavy manual labour, sawing down trees and sawing them up even further to guarantee next year's supply of firewood. 3 to 6 hours a day. I'm still not done, of course. And this is all done with a handsaw, I might add. No fancy chainsaws for this bearded bard whose approach to manual labour apparently reside in the backwater eras of time, where neither electricity nor fossil fuels existed to power engines. How's that for being reactionary? As one might well suspect, not using a chainsaw is my own choice, so I can't complain over much about that. The exercise and muscle gain from doing this manually far outweighs the muscle fatigue and subsequent increase in this goddamned chronic pains of mine. Given time, it is sure to help me with the chronic pains, as long as I manage to keep going when the going gets tough. It is, in short, good for me, even if I must admit that it sure as hammered hell don't feel like it at this moment, as my body is screaming in pain and the mind has retreated, hiding somewhere in the sinuses, attempting to escape the inevitable, namely carrying on with the task as soon as I am done writing this particular ramble. The ramble took longer than I thought it would. It is now, at the moment, a week since I began rambling, somewhat surprising really. Then again, preparing for fatherhood does take quite a lot of time and energy, so maybe not all that surprising when all is said and done. And the firewood is stored in a rather impromptu storing unit which I built myself using wood from the trees I had only just felled. Not exactly an overly artistic or particularly clever piece of architectural design. It sure as hell won't win any engineering prizes. It gets the job done, and so it functions as advertised. That's about all it does, and that's about all that matters. It was also rather fun to build. All the materials was cut down and collected by myself, so it was a rewarding experience. There is no shame, I believe, in taking pride in one's work. Quite the contrary, I believe it is of great value and even greater importance. And despite the temperature outside now being exactly what one would expect of the temperatures of early December in Norway, I am looking forward to going outside and carrying on with it. Writing this honestly feels like wasting time, which it of course isn't, yet manual labour is sure as hell underrated, particularly so when one gets a good flow in it. Alas, there is little that can be done when it's as dark outside as it is. That's what waking in the wee hours of the morning will get you. I am writing this at about 5 in the morning, with a pot full of coffee and a head full of sleeplessness. There was precious little sleep tonight, and in order to get something constructive done before the rest of the house wakes up, this ramble seemed like a good idea. Of course, it follows my early morning ritual of relaxing and reading a bit. My, how good slow and lazy mornings are. Highly recommended if you haven't tried it. But I digress. Back to the beginning of the ramble. With howling icy winds and frosty rains and all that other stuff us poor Vikings are so accustomed to over here in the frozen wastes of Norway pissing down on me, I stood thinking about emotional labour. It really ain't easy having to think about how to do this sewing stuff, you know. Very hard work, that. Dangerous for my mental health even. Not as though doing things in and around the house is expected of adults. The government ought to reimburse me properly for doing all this work around the house. It seems only fitting after all. Why should I do my own work in my own time for the benefit of me and my own without being reimbursed for it? It is unfair, really. Not as though the work and the result of the work is reward enough in itself. Hell's bells, but I demand pay for taking care of my own home and growing family, goddammit. Not to mention having to listen to my wife talk, and that is such a horrible thing, obviously. If this sounds bad, I would like to point you in the direction of the silly feminist idea of emotional labour. Many are the morons whom I have read state that listening to one's male partner's problems is such a hefty and thankless toil for women. For we all know, despite the feminist insistence that the main problem of men can be traced back to the fact that they don't open up and talk about their problems, that the main issue with men is that they can't stop burdening their partners by talking about their problems. There is some mental disconnect here, but I'm sure that's just coincidental. Oh well. Can I tempt anyone with a fresh mug of delightedly heated male tears? And this I have learned from the full ferocious fury of feminism and its fanciful wit. Domestic chores, in all their grueling, life-destroying and soul-sucking difficulty, in all their horrible and harrowing demands, are considered to be amongst the worst things ever. It's literally fascism, Nazism and misogyny with a side helping of domestic violence and probably some white supremacy, why not? Supposedly, all these demanding and debilitating domestic duties are a burden heaped upon the shoulders of women, beasts of burden as they so obviously are, poor things. And so it follows that taking care of one's own home is something one ought to be paid for, preferably by Big Daddy government, if one just so happens to be a woman. I see no reason why this should not also extend to the chores done by men, but, men don't do no domestic work worth talking about. Except doing most of the hard, heavy, physical outdoorsy stuff like mowing the lawn, preparing firewood, various repairs in and around the house, raking leaves, shoveling snow, building and maintaining this and that and the other, changing the tires on the cars, etc, etc, not to mention any and all to do with hooking up electronics. I still have nightmares from rigging up our surround sound system. Oh, the dubious and strange horror of it all. Yet, for some reason, these are never counted as proper domestic chores. Only the traditionally female chores are to be counted as that, such as cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry and similar safe inside stuff. Gee, I wonder why. It might have something to do with the fact that it would quite possibly prove the feminist assertions about women bearing the brunt of the domestic chores wrong. It might actually disprove the silly notion that women are domestic slaves, bound to the wish and the will of the almighty patriarchy and their terrible foot soldiers in the guise of their oppressive as fuck husbands or partners. It might, in truth and in fact, bring up something which would be quite bothersome to the prevailing narrative as presented to us by bored feminists with an ability to bitch and moan and complain about trivialities that by far exceed their ability to do some actual goddamned honest work. It might, when all comes into its all, show that men do far more of the domestic duties than the dominant discourse would have us believe. Why, one could almost be tempted to believe that the domestic duties are split fairly evenly based on some biological differences like the always pesky differences in upper body strength. Somehow, this difference in upper body strength makes it easier for men to do the heavier and harder stuff. This is clearly unbelievable. Nothing but a patriarchal smokescreen. A lie concocted in order to chain women to the kitchen and to the washing machines and other such domestic duties of a dreary, tyrannical and destructive nature. It might, in actuality, show that maybe men do more of the domestic chores and duties than what we have been presented. It is not women that are given to-do lists or honey-do lists by men. Quite the opposite, in fact. Just saying. Women can demand men do. Men cannot, under any circumstances, demand that women do. This don't count as domestic duties, nor as demands, of course. They are nothing but simple requests. Besides, men must take responsibility and keep their home in working order. By the way, I have only ever received one honey-do list myself. It tells me to grab a beer and relax, in that order, and I am perfectly fine with that. Observation shows me that every time the domestic duties of men, the things mentioned above, are brought up as an argument against the nonsensical wailing that women do everything of that horrible domestic stuff like cleaning and cooking, the results are usually the same, the counter-arguments always as inane. These are not things done every day, which is true on the face of it. One does not prepare firewood every day of the year, nor does one shovel snow or rake leaves every day of the year, or mow the lawn. The seasons dictate that this is rather difficult to do every day of the year. Still, there's always something that needs to be done every day of every season of every year. Besides, it is not really comparable to loading the dishwasher and folding laundry, extremely physically demanding and emotionally taxing work as it so clearly is. The work which men tend to do outside of the home are often more physically demanding. Men also tend to work longer hours and less part-time than women do. With this knowledge, one would not be amiss in believing that men tend to be more tired, drained and, dare I even say, exhausted when the workday is done. Besides, it is really not all that strange that the one who opts to stay at home following childbirth, for example, is also the one expected to do the brunt of the housework whilst the other party is out working. This is usually women. Gee, I wonder why. Probably patriarchy. Because of course it is. Still, some men become stay-at-home dads. I would of course expect the same from them. Even though men who opt to stay at home and not work are often painted and presented as lazy, freeloading bastards living off the work of the woman, whilst women opting to stay at home and not work are considered to be domestic slaves, imprisoned women never reaching their full potential, forced into domestic servitude by the horrors of her tyrannical partner and the terrible patriarchal society which we live in. Odd and peculiar that. I once lived with a woman who complained because I didn't fold the laundry, particularly the fucking socks, properly. Properly meant nothing more and nothing less than how she folded it. The fact that there are more than one way to do something did not factor into it for some odd reason. It weren't as though I just rolled it all into a ball and threw it into a corner of the room to lay there and be forgotten. I did fold it, such as I had learned to fold it. This, however, was not good enough, because it wasn't how she did it. So, every single goddamn time I folded the damned laundry, she went ahead and redid all of it. You can probably see where this is going. Eventually, I just stopped folding the damned laundry and let her do it, since she always redid it anyway. Why should I worry about the fucking stuff when all I got was complaints followed by her redoing it? Logic clearly dictated that she should be free to do it exactly as she saw fit. What followed after a few weeks of this was her complaining that I never folded the laundry, as one would expect. I told the truth of why I stopped folding the bloody laundry and was told that all I had to do was to learn how she did it. And this was clearly the superior way of folding the fucking laundry, particularly those motherfucking socks. I tried telling her that there are more than one way of doing something, and that it would cost far more energy for me to learn a new way of doing something than it would cost for her to just accept that her way was not the only way, that sometimes people do things differently to her. It did not compute. The relationship did not last. Probably not due to the laundry folding debacle, but who the hell knows, right? At the very least, I learned something from the experience. Women make more of a fuss over the housework than men do. Quite often, it is their way or the highway. If things are not up to snuff, such as women consider it, they will redo it only then to complain that men don't do enough of the housework. And this instead of accepting that there are multiple ways of doing something, that perfection is not necessary and that something is cleaned when it is cleaned. Not everything has to be done according to the whims of the great matriarch. I would think it rather selfish, actually, to demand things be done exactly as oneself does it. As long as it is done to a satisfactory manner, that should be good enough. More often than not, it is done to a satisfactory manner. It's just done in a different manner. That, of course, is heresy. It seems to me that many women quite simply mistake efficiency when doing chores for sloppiness when doing chores. Just because something takes less time when done by someone else does not mean that it is done in a lazy and sloppy manner. It means that it is done in a different manner. Because there are more than one way of doing things. Doing the domestic chores should be reward enough in itself. Having a clean home, having clean clothes, having warm food, having firewood, having a garden free of weeds, etc. is its own reward. I believe it is wise that one takes pride in one's work, be that outside or inside a home, at work or at home. There's no shame in that, and one should enjoy being in a clean house where the work that needs to be done is done. That ought to be reward enough for domestic chores. Adult human beings are expected to be able to care for themselves. Shocking, I know. This includes domestic chores, dull and boring and monotonous as they may very well be. The older I get, though, the more I come to appreciate the mundane. Cleaning can quite easily turn into a profound, I would even dare say meditative task, where one is engaged in the same thing that one has been doing for years on end, free to let the mind wander and think about other stuff on account of the mundane tasks being something one is so accustomed to that it is done almost automatically. And though I admit that I much prefer the heavier, harder, more physically demanding tasks, the traditionally male chores, to that of cleaning and especially cooking, I am not a good chef, not by any stretch of the imagination. I think cleaning is not without its merits where the profundity of the mundane is concerned. A lot of the problems in our societies of today, I believe, can be traced back to automation and the boredom that follows. Everything, with a few exceptions, is automated. The laundry is no longer done by hand. We have dishwashers, we have self-cleaning ovens, automated heated, ready-made meals that only require heating for a few minutes, if that. We have all these conveniences of the modern age. What used to take a long time to do is over and done with in a matter of minutes. Just about every morning, for example, since I get up way before the rest of the house, I clean the kitchen. Which means that I put stuff in the dishwasher, hand wash what few items we have that are not dishwasher safe, and wash the kitchen counter, as well as sharpening our kitchen knife. At worst, this takes 30 minutes of my day. Usually it takes about 10 minutes. Not exactly a grueling, life-devouring task. I also make sure that our dog's dishes are filled with food and water. And the same holds true for laundry. That is the domain of my wife for the most part, and it's done much in the same way, automated, over and done with fairly quick. When everything is as automated as it is, one is left with quite a lot of free time, more than enough time to think and to ponder and to consider. Or, failing that, more than enough time to be bored to death. Boredom, I have come to understand, is a product of immaturity more than anything else. A mature mind may very easily find a way to entertain itself, to keep both mind and body busy. Keeping busy and keeping oneself occupied is important. Also, in our day and age, one should be hard-pressed indeed not to find a source of entertainment. Yet, that is not good enough for some people. It is way more important to conjure forth complaints from the hallowed realm of the petty grievance, and as such manufacture some drama in order to break the mundane dullness of everyday life, the void of purposelessness that stares one in the face. This easily happens when there is so much free time to use and to spend as one sees fit. Keeping busy keeps depression at bay, and it occupies the mind and it occupies the body. When someone is incapable of finding something to do, something to occupy their time, boredom inevitably follows if one has not taught oneself how to entertain oneself, leading the way to overblown resentment, amplifying petty grievances and other such naughty little things that may well be detrimental to one's mental health. I doubt social media helps in any way, shape or form. One might easily become preoccupied with finding a steady stream of petty little items of annoyance in an attempt to find someone to blame for something within that don't feel quite right, all amplified by people of a similar ilk on social media. One is in great need of a scapegoat after all, it's only human. Working on oneself is such a chore and such a bother. That is something only men are commanded to do, no matter how ridiculous or how unfair it is. Far better to externalize all grief and guilt and shame and boredom and whatever else. Far better to move the locus of control from the internal to the external and blame everything and everyone but oneself. And so women may blame their male partners for all the this and that on a small scale, the boredom of being a homemaker in an age where just about everything is automated, a luxury really, becomes a position of prime enslavement. On a broader scale, our feminist society just up and blame men in general for not doing enough in and around the house, despite doing their fair share and then some. If the outdoorsy stuff, if the building and maintaining stuff, if the repairing stuff, if the hooking up of electronics stuff and so and such is presented and accounted for. Why not just blame men in general for various other petty and overblown grievances while we're at it? Hell spells, but life is so easy, relative to the past and especially in the West, in the here and now, that difficulties must be manufactured. For fuck's sake. There must be something to complain about, and there must be someone to blame for the complaints which are amplified and manufactured to an obscene degree. Why? Life without drama is so boring, you know. In places where life every day is a genuine struggle for survival, where every day is a rather difficult day, where the work-life balance is not such as it is in more developed places, in places where all day every day is filled with some task to do or other, do you honestly expect to find petty, imagined and ridiculously overblown grievances such as mansplaining, man-spreading, man-corrupting, man-slamming and other such nonsense given front-page coverage on the news? It seems rather obvious to me that such silliness as the above is a product of immature minds, bored to death from having nothing to do, of people who struggle to find some purpose and something to do, people who, quite simply, cannot for the life of them figure out a way to occupy themselves. People who have been sheltered and catered to for most of their lives, whose view of themselves and their opinions is such that it has never been challenged before, be that by themselves or by other people. Our present era is depraved and decadent, and we are dull and we are bored and we are hooked on the immediate satisfaction, hooked on everything being instantaneous. If something takes more than 5 minutes to do or have done, we freak out and we lash out. When most of one's needs are taken care of, when most of the chores are automated, when most of one's time is free time, is downtime, is boring time, petty, small, manufactured and maybe even completely made up, imagined, minuscule issues becomes bloated, overblown and gigantic issues that must take center stage. Lacking in concentration and lacking in patience and lacking in the ability to just be and to just let be. I cannot be the only one who found it remarkable that the popular battle cry of this day and age is one that demands the government intervene in everything, that personal life must be dictated and controlled by governmental policy, up to and including demanding payments for doing domestic chores. But that ought to be a different ramble. This has gone on for far too long already. One could always just relax and take it easy, keep oneself occupied and find something constructive to do. Maybe rest on one's laurels for a little while, enjoy life for once, without digging up minuscule issues to distract oneself as well as society at large from larger issues. Feminism is profoundly talented in this regard, manufacturing issues in order to stay relevant so that this tangled mess that is our societies do not turn around and pay service to the problems, issues and lives of men in general. However, taking it easy, being grateful, learning how to keep occupied, understanding that adult life is marked by obligations and chores and duties and other such things would require some honest to God gratitude and some decent maturity amongst other things. And where's the fun in that? And that, I think, was that for this ramble. I hope you enjoyed it more than my previous ramblings. Thank you very much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe and all that other stuff. Check out the links down below if you wish to support my further descent into insanity and my caffeine addiction. And I'll catch you next time. This is my Rheology here, signing off.